Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Album of the Week video. This is episode number 228. Today I am finally here to spotlight Melissa, the iconic classic debut full-length studio album for Mercyful Fate, originally released on October 30th via Roadrunner Records, also their debut for the label as well. So with all that said, let's begin. After the release of their iconic EP, which had gained them quite a bit of attention, with some of the attention being controversial due to the cover art, which record stores had to put black bags over the jacket to hide the art, which is self-explanatory, but nonetheless also received positive responses from the audiences. By 1983, the band would ink a deal with the new Roadrunner Records label. By July 18th, they would then be paired up with producer Henrik Lund and be taken over to Easy Sound Studios, which Henrik was the co-owner of, to record of what would become their first full-length LP. The band spent 12 days in the studio to record and mix the album. The songs had been thoroughly arranged and rehearsed in advance to make the most of the limited time. Lund, who had never produced a metal band before, mixed the album on his own, but accepted comments from the musicians on his different takes. The band found their procedure very irritating, but in retrospect, Diamond understands that he didn't want a bunch of amateurs hanging over his shoulder. They would lay down technically 9 songs, with some of the songs being new takes of songs that had been previously demoed, some of them dating all the way back to their days as brats. Ultimately, 7 songs were chosen, with only 1 being left over. Apparently at the time, Roadrunner Records had asked the band to do a cover song, so the band recorded a cover of Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song. The band fortunately skipped it because they felt it did not fit very well with the lyrics and feel of the album. According to Sherman, Diamond's performance was very surprisingly close to that of Robert Plant. Would have been interesting if a recording of this had survived. So the leftover that was chosen was the awesome Black Masses, which had first went under the title of You Asked For It, which can be found on the Return of the Vampire album. This song would end up as the B-side to the Black Funeral 7-inch single. So by October 30th, Melissa is unleashed on the day of Hallows' Eve, for it to be wickedly brought into the homes to possess the souls of every unsuspecting person. So, featuring 7 tracks, clocking in at the length of 40 minutes and 10 seconds. These 7 tracks are, of course, being Evil, Curse of the Pharaohs, Into the Coven, At the Sound of the Demon Bell, Black Funeral, Satan's Fall, and then finally ending with the title track. So there you go, folks. There's your 7 tracks. If anyone was to ask me what album truly possesses the spiritual essence of heavy metal, I would easily choose this album, as I feel it contains all of the elements that made heavy metal so appealing to me in the first place. It's also no secret that this was the album that sold me on Mercyful Fate and King Diamond in general. First seeing their name pictured listed in some 100 metal bands magazine that I had decades ago interested both me and my brother. But back to Melissa here. So just like how I said it before in my Album of the Week video for their EP, I had never heard anything quite like Mercyful Fate before. just upon hearing the opening track, That Was Evil, was enough to blow me off my feet. Literally, my jaw dropped to the floor when I was first hearing this. From King Diamond's voice, to the mesmerizing twin guitar attack from the team of Sherman and Denner, to the killer rhythm section of bass player Timmy Hansen and drummer Kim Ruz, especially with Kim Ruz, who really had a awesome drum snare / tone, reminding me a lot of guys like Cozy Powell and Ian Pace, just in terms of overall distinctiveness. Then of course, there is the badass album art, which glues this whole album together. Fascinating fact here though, this was not the first intended artwork. Thomas Holm originally had came up with a cover that depicted the band walking through the deserts of Egypt towards a giant skull in the sky. However, according to one story, the artwork was eventually rejected by Roadrunner. However, I've also heard that the band technically rejecting it in favor with the other art that Thomas Holm created, which was after supposedly a maybe few hundred pressings of the original artwork from Thomas Holm was pressed. So again, they scrapped it in favor of the one that we've now come to know and has been solidified as being iconic. But again, as you see, maybe it was for a lot of the right reasons that they chose to reject this artwork. But it is very cool to know that at one point, that the more classic artwork was not the firstly intended cover art. So, just had to point that one out. Now, over the years, there is always something different that I find to love about this album. But the one fascinating thing that has struck with me though, is that I've always noticed how prog-like in nature that most of these songs are. Now I know, technically Mercyful Fate were always classified with being considered proto-black metal, but yet I always had a hard time trying to grasp at that, cause at the end of the day, it just sounds like traditional heavy metal that is pretty damn sinister sounding, though the riff that starts at the 1 minute and 47 mark in Satan's Fall is pretty close to sounding black metal. But over time, after getting into quite a bit of heavy prog rock bands from the 70s, rehearing Mercyful Fate's stuff, I start to notice new things within their music, and then it becomes more clear to articulate. And with the Metal Theologian in his Top 10 Essential Metal Albums video, to me, hit the nail on the head when describing Mercyful Fate, I think a lot better than most black metal snobs do. Mercyful Fate are pretty much like a hard prog rock band disguised as a serious heavy metal band. And the way to understand this is by removing yourself from what you've already understand about them and just go back into Mercyful Fate's music blank. And as you're re-listening to it, begin to picture in your mind a Hammond organ player if he was actually in the band playing along to the grooves of the music. And then after picturing that, come back to me that you now understand of where I'm getting at with the prog description. If you'd put a Hammond organ player in Mercyful Fate, it really would make this description a lot clearer. There is a prog-like nature to these songs. Now, I'm not necessarily claiming that Mercyful Fate are now a progressive rock band, but there is some clear-cut similarities in what you'll find. If anything, it's indeed prog-influenced or inspired. Just for instance, Evil, though straight-ahead metal, has a prog nature to it, because how the tempo begins to change in the middle of the song, to even also changing the riff notes. You can easily replace the solos in the middle portion with the Hammond organ solo, and you'd easily understand it. Same with At the Sound of the Demon Bell, a song about, well, Halloween, one of my personal favorites, which never ends the way it starts. There is like an estimate of like 10 different riffs in this little over 5-minute song, and I swear, the riff that is heard at the beginning of the 4-minute and 17 mark reminds me a lot of a particular riff in the Pat Travers song, Snortin' Whiskey. If you want to actually hear this for yourself, go find the Pat Travers song on YouTube and skip all the way to the 2-minute and 8-second mark, and then re-listen to the Mercyful Fate song and try and tell me that you don't hear it, 'cause I sure as hell can. Then of course, we have the epic as shit Satan's Fall, which is very progressive in nature. Again, like I counted with the previous song, I did count the number of riffs in this song, and there's like an estimate of 15 different riffs in this 11-minute and 25-second epic. This was, of course, one of the more challenging songs for the band, as according to Denner, took ages to learn and elicited an eerie feeling the few times he heard it. Hank Sherman wrote the music for the song, which was composed during many sleepless nights on his unplugged guitar in his living room. The band had kept rehearsing the song for a long time in its unfinished form, as Sherman continuously added new parts. According to Denner, there are about 16 different riffs, which is funny how I counted 15, but that could be due to the very many ways a few certain riffs were played at different paces in the song. Of course, Satan's Fall was the band's longest song with a running time order of well over 11 minutes, like I stated, until the band released the Dead Again album, of which the title track is about 13 minutes long. Then of course, we have the eerie album closer, the title track. This also has a prog feel to it, though I swear, that beginning riff does remind me a lot of AC/DC's Are You Ready? Of course, that came out several years later, 1990. I probably just fucking ruined it for every serious Mercyful Fate fan now, after they are now forced to now go and listen to Are You Ready to hear the resemblance. Now, this one, since I again counted, has an estimate of 8 different riffs, but is more subtle here than in the 3 songs that I mentioned. I also feel that this was the band's attempt at a Beyond the Realms of Death-like song, cause how it's structured, but it's not a clone, just has a similar feel, if you can get that. Also, fun fact, there are 2 different mixes for this song. I even once mentioned this in my Sealed to Reveal video for the Metal Blade CD reissue from a few years back. But when this was being mastered for the US market, that would get released through Megaforce, there was a slight change in the mix for the title track, mostly heard with the beginning solo from Michael Denner. It is being drenched in reverb, and even King's vocals have a slight reverb effect that isn't quite felt in the original Euromix through Roadrunner. Even some vocal parts are deleted. The other biggest difference with the US mix for this song is at the ending, where King's voice is given this haunting-like effect, again, due to the reverb that is just drenched over his vocal recording, which I actually find to be pretty fitting for this. I hate to say it, but I think it fits perfect for this song than the dry effect that is heard on the original mix for the song. So in a way, I've come to prefer the US mix for the song Melissa, as I think it elevates the story for this song and works great on any Halloween playlist. Really gets you into that mood. Now the songs like Curse of the Pharaohs, which originally went under the title of Night Riders and dates all the way back to their days as Brats. Into the Coven, which first went under the title of Love Criminals, which also dates back to the days as Brats. Fun fact, in 1985, this song was listed on the PMRC's Filthy 15 list for a cult dialogue of some sort. And of course, Black Funeral, though Black Funeral does have an estimate of 8 different riffs, which is pretty damn insane for the length of time this has, are kinda less insane in the prog aspect. I mean, they do have their slight prog moments, but they feel more straightforward in their presentation. But with all that said, with the combined number of riffs each of these songs have, it's an estimate of 65 riffs total. Pretty insane. I just love this album, and I think it encapsulates all of everything that I want to find in my metal. I feel pretty lucky to have heard this when I was still in my early teens. In a way, it kind of makes it more special to me, knowing that I discovered Mercyful Fate at an early age and not when I was much older. Gives it that cult feeling. But since Mercyful Fate are now seen as a bigger thing these days, but back in 2008, you either still had to discover on your own or know someone to discover Mercyful Fate. So 40 years for this iconic classic. For those who grew up with this album, you know what to do. And if you have spent countless of times listening to this album, whether they are positive or negative, you can leave them all in the comment section below. But if you're new to knowing about Mercyful Fate, if King Diamond appeals to you, then I recommend Mercyful Fate. But if they don't,
then there is a place in hell for you.
Just kidding. If you don't like King or Fate, that's fine. I'm not going to wish the burning pits of hell for you. So with that, this is Henry Thradshed saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. And have a happy Halloween.